Hey everyone! Tonight we will step into a world where warmth was rare, and survival itself was a silent miracle whispered into the frost-covered night. A world where ordinary people, medieval peasants, fought the cold not with comfort but with courage. People who had nothing, yet somehow found a way to live when the world outside was white and merciless. Before we begin, I have a small request for you. If you enjoy my history-based work, if you like stories that bring the forgotten voices of the past to life, then please subscribe to my channel, leave a like, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It is truly amazing for me to see who is coming here from all over the world. Now, dim the lights a little. Lower the volume of the fan slightly. Let the room be covered in that silence which is like the moment before sleep. Lie back, close your eyes, and imagine a fire flickering faintly in the distance. Because tonight, we are going back to a time where even fire was a very fragile friend. There was a time when families were so close that skin touched skin, not just out of love, but to keep death away. No wall was strong enough, no blanket warm enough, no privacy existed, just life touching life. Children, parents, the elderly, all lying together in a small room, trying to share warmth and trying to survive another night. So take a deep breath. Fill your lungs with that cold air. Now, let's go to those long, dark winter nights of the medieval world, where every sunrise was a victory, and every heartbeat was a silent protest against the cold. The long winter night begins. The night had fallen like a thick, silent blanket over the small medieval village. Frost covered the roofs, and every breath in the cold air seemed to freeze before it even reached the lips. Inside the humble homes, the world was no less harsh. Yet here, survival took a quiet, stubborn form. Families huddled together in rooms no larger than a modern closet, skin pressed against skin, sharing warmth as though life itself depended on it, because, in truth, it did. These were not homes of comfort. Walls were made of thin wooden frames filled with mud and straw, patched with whatever animal hides could be found. Cracks in the walls invited the winter wind like a relentless intruder, whistling through the tiny gaps and chilling every exposed inch of skin. A single fire sputtered feebly in the center, and its warmth only reached those who sat closest. The farther you were from it, the more the cold seemed to bite, turning toes numb and hands stiff. Bathing was rare. In the dead of winter, with water frozen in barrels and streams, most villagers would go weeks without a proper wash. A cold splash from a basin might suffice every fortnight, but anything more was a luxury too dangerous to attempt. Hygiene was pragmatic, not indulgent. The smell of smoke, straw, and humans blended into the familiar scent of survival, pungent, earthy, and alive. Toilet arrangements were crude. A corner of the hut might hold a wooden seat or a small pit lined with straw. These were shared, and privacy was non-existent. Children learned early to adjust their modesty to the demands of the room. The elderly or infirm had the most difficulty, but the community adapted silently, offering a hand or a blanket when needed. For women, winter brought another layer of challenge. Menstruation did not pause for the cold. Women fashioned makeshift cloth pads from rags, washing them sparingly in cold water. They endured the discomfort silently,
their bodies pressed close to husbands or family members to stay warm, as any separation risked frostbite or illness. The tiny, crowded space meant that even the most private struggles were visible to the rest of the household. Yet there was no shame, only the shared understanding that survival depended on cooperation. Children, often no older than 7 or 8, were tucked between adults and livestock. Goats, sheep, and even a cow might share the floor, their warmth a small but vital comfort. These animals were more than food. They were living heaters. A child might wake to find a sheep pressing against them, hooves awkwardly poking into the bed, but the warmth it provided was worth the inconvenience. Mothers whispered prayers over their children, ensuring their tiny bodies did not succumb to frostbite in the night. Beds were rudimentary at best, sacks of hay or straw, sometimes layered with old rushes. The floor was uneven and cold. Fleas were constant companions, their tiny bites a reminder of life's persistent annoyances. Yet, despite the discomfort, the frost, the hunger, there was a strange rhythm to these nights. Families whispered, prayed, and told stories in hushed tones. A child's soft giggle was precious. A mother's whispered lullaby, barely audible over the crackle of the fire and the wind outside, became the soundtrack of endurance. Every heartbeat was measured against the cold, every shiver a reminder of how fragile life was and how resilient they had to be. In these moments, privacy was a concept too distant to exist. Children, parents, and grandparents lay together, pressed close for warmth, sharing the struggle silently. The cold left no room for embarrassment, no place for secrets, just the raw, shared human need to survive. And in this shared suffering, something extraordinary happened. Life persisted, stubbornly, quietly, in the frozen night. The long winter night had only begun, and though it stretched ahead dark and merciless, inside these small huts, hearts beat in defiance, bodies pressed close, and life, against all odds, continued.
The bitter night labor. The village was quiet, but the night itself was alive. Frost glittered under the pale moonlight, covering rooftops, cobblestone paths, and fields alike in a frozen white silence. Yet life did not pause. Even in the dead of winter, survival demanded work. Outside the small huts, the cold struck without mercy. Men and older boys ventured out to repair fences, gather firewood, or tend to livestock. Each step on the icy ground was a battle. Snow crunched sharply beneath their feet, and every gust of wind cut through layers of wool, leaving fingers red and stiff. Sometimes the work was under the open sky, the stars above indifferent to human suffering. Lanterns flickered, barely cutting through the darkness, casting long shadows on the frost-bitten earth. Stone houses offered little respite. Their thick walls held some warmth from daytime sunlight, but at night the chill returned like a relentless visitor. Cracks around doors and windows allowed wind to whistle through, echoing eerily against the cold stones. Those inside wrapped themselves tightly in layers of clothing, pressing children close to their sides. Even the fire in the hearth, burning tirelessly, could only warm a fraction of the room. People shifted continually, moving nearer or further from the blaze, a careful choreography guided by instinct and experience. Children, small and vulnerable,
faced the harshest trials. Little bodies shook beneath layers of wool and straw. Their tiny hands were often too cold to hold anything properly. Sometimes they slept pressed between siblings or against parents, sharing warmth like currency. A child's whimper could be stifled only by the pressing bodies of those around them. And yet, despite the harshness, their resilience amazed even the elders. Nature had made them fragile, but necessity had made them strong. Family dynamics shifted to accommodate survival. Privacy became an illusion. Husbands, wives, children, and grandparents all shared the same small space. Bodies touched bodies, not out of affection alone, but to preserve life. Even arguments and squabbles paused in the face of shared danger. Every heartbeat, every shiver became a silent reminder that the night was a threat, and togetherness was their defense. The fire demanded constant care. Someone had to stir the embers, add dry twigs, or even cow dung to maintain warmth. A lapse could mean frost creeping over the floorboards and into beds. The room was a dance of proximity, moving nearer the flames when cold threatened, retreating to allow others their share of heat. It was a silent negotiation that defined the rhythm of survival. Food was another worry. Night meals were simple, usually a thin gruel or soup, maybe a handful of turnips or a small piece of salted meat. Every morsel was rationed, often divided to ensure that the youngest and oldest survived. The act of sharing food became almost ceremonial. Each bite weighed carefully, each sip of water measured. Hunger was a constant companion, yet people endured it without complaint, for complaining wasted precious energy. Stories and prayers were the quiet threads that stitched the night together. Mothers whispered lullabies, fathers murmured blessings, and older siblings told tales to keep children's minds off the cold. Even the smallest stories about animals, heroes, or the coming spring became lifelines, a way to survive psychologically when the body trembled. Rituals, no matter how simple, gave structure and hope to nights that otherwise seemed endless. And yet, even in the bitter night labor and relentless cold, moments of humanity shone. A shared blanket, a hand on a frozen shoulder, a whispered encouragement, these were small victories against the night. In this extreme darkness, the bonds of family became their fortress. The cold could not penetrate the warmth of unity, and life, fragile and precious, persisted. As the moon traced its path across the sky, the village endured. Every creaking timber, every gust of wind, every child's breath became part of the rhythm of survival. The long night was far from over, and the struggle had only deepened. But in the shared labor, the shared suffering, and the shared love, the medieval villagers found a strength that no winter could destroy. The harsh winter day. The sun rose weakly over the frost-laden village, casting a pale, hesitant light across fields stiff with ice. Daytime offered no relief from the cold. Rather, it brought a different set of challenges. Inside the cramped stone and mud houses, families stirred from their shared beds, their bodies stiff and aching from the night's relentless chill. Every movement was deliberate, every stretch measured, as if muscles feared to betray the cold. Morning began with ritual, not leisure. Children rubbed frozen hands together, trying to awaken circulation, while parents tended to the hearth, coaxing embers back to life with dried twigs, straw, or scraps of wood. Meals were meager, a thin porridge, perhaps flavored with turnips or stored root vegetables, divided carefully so no one went entirely without. Even this required negotiation. The youngest often received the smallest portions, the eldest the most, but everyone shared, for the survival of the collective outweighed individual hunger. Outside, the men and older boys prepared for daily labor. Snow-covered fields demanded attention. Livestock required feeding and milking. Fences needed repair before storms worsened, and firewood had to be chopped and hauled. Each task was a confrontation with the frozen world. Hands numbed within mittens, backs bent beneath loads of wood, faces red and raw from the wind. Survival was a continuous struggle. Women, meanwhile, managed the home, often undertaking multiple tasks at once. Laundry was minimal, and in winter, washing clothes was a challenge. Frozen water and sub-zero temperatures made even simple chores difficult. Meals had to be prepared from what little storage allowed, often while soothing crying children or attending to the elderly. Women also dealt with the private hardships of menstruation, crafting makeshift cloth pads, washing them in icy water, and pressing close to family members to preserve warmth. Privacy was non-existent, yet the community adapted silently, accepting these realities as part of survival. Children were not spared from work. Even at a young age, they carried small bundles of wood, fed the animals, or helped churn butter and grind grain. Education was practical. They learned survival, not just letters. Lessons came through observation and imitation, often with an elder demonstrating a task while narrating its importance. Stories told during chores became embedded with wisdom. A tale about a clever fox might also teach patience and strategy, skills essential to navigating harsh winters. Health was fragile. Frostbite, respiratory infections, and malnutrition were ever-present threats. Every cough, every shiver could be a warning. Parents monitored children constantly, rubbing hands and feet, layering clothing, and offering small amounts of food frequently. The elderly required the same attention, their weakened bodies less capable of withstanding the cold. Medicines were simple, herbs, poultices, or prayers, yet every precaution mattered. Despite hardship, human connection flourished. Families worked, ate, and endured together. Neighbors visited when possible, exchanging firewood, a handful of grain, or stories that lightened the monotony of the frozen day. Inside each home, the day was punctuated by small victories. A child laughing despite frozen toes, a fire blazing steadily, a shared meal consumed without complaint. These moments were celebrated quietly. The harsh winter had not eliminated joy, but refined it, distilling happiness into the briefest gestures of warmth and human care. By evening, the shadows lengthened and the cold deepened. Labor concluded, and the village prepared to return to the shared struggle of the night. Families pressed together once more, recalling the day's hardships and small triumphs, hearts beating in rhythm with the fire, bodies layered in wool and straw, ready to face another long, unforgiving night. Even in the light of day, the winter's grip was undeniable. Every breath misted in the frigid air. Every task reminded them that survival was not a guarantee, but a continuous effort. And yet, in every touch, every whispered word, every shared burden, the villagers demonstrated a resilience and unity that no storm could break. When night returned, the sun disappeared long before anyone was ready. Evening didn't arrive gently in medieval winter. It fell. It descended like a heavy curtain,
swallowing the landscape in one slow breath. By the time the last streaks of orange faded from the sky, the fields had already stiffened under a thin crust of frost, and the familiar world shrank to the faint glow of a few fires scattered across the village. Inside the peasant cottages, preparations began early. The day's final chores were done with urgency. Animals fed, water fetched before it froze, embers stirred to life before darkness claimed them. Mothers called out to their children, their voices carrying through the chill air like fading echoes. By the time the last bucket was hung by the wall, the village was already silent, save for the groaning wind that pressed against the thin wattle walls. Dinner was a humble affair. A pot of broth, maybe a handful of dried peas, or a scrap of salted meat if fortune smiled. Everything was shared, always shared. There were no plates, just wooden bowls passed from hand to hand, spoons carved from bone or ash. The taste was secondary, survival was the real flavor. Yet in that dim glow of the hearth, as steam curled upward and shadows danced across faces, there was something almost sacred about it. The warmth of being together against the cold, of defying the darkness just one more night. Once the meal was over, families gathered close to the hearth, the only light and heat in the home. The fire's glow painted their faces gold and red, turning the mud walls into flickering tapestries of shadow. Children huddled near their mothers, their eyes wide, listening as the elders began to speak, not about chores or hunger, but about stories. It was through the stories that the peasants tamed the night. Tales of ghosts wandering through frozen fields, of lost travelers guided home by candlelight, of wolves that spoke in human voices. The boundaries between superstition and survival blurred. For them, the night was alive, full of spirits, saints, and unseen watchers. Sometimes the stories served a purpose. Parents warned their children not to wander after dark. "The wind carries souls tonight," they'd whisper. "If you go outside, it might mistake you for one." The children would cling closer, half afraid, half fascinated, the firelight trembling in their wide eyes. Outside, the wind moaned through the thatch, and every creak of wood or distant howl felt personal, like something calling your name. Even adults felt it, that ancient, primal unease that comes when the dark feels too thick, when silence sounds too alive. Yet they endured, drawing closer, their shared warmth a fragile defiance. After stories came silence, a silence so deep you could hear your own heart. The fire crackled softly, its glow shrinking as wood turned to ash. One by one, voices faded, replaced by the rustle of straw and the sound of breath. Beds were prepared, not beds as we know them, but straw mattresses laid in corners, often shared by 5, 6, or more people. Children slept pressed between their parents, the elderly at the edges, all wrapped in wool, furs, or whatever scraps they owned. Skin touched skin, not out of affection, but necessity. The human body was the only furnace they could count on. There was no privacy here. A cough, a murmur, a whisper, all were heard by everyone. But in that closeness lay comfort, too. The soft rhythm of many breaths filled the room, a reminder that they had survived another day. Outside, the cold deepened, but inside, life clung stubbornly to the warmth it created for itself. Sometimes, someone would wake in the middle of the night to stoke the fire, to check on a child, or simply because the cold had crept too close. They would stare into the faint red coals and think about the day to come, about whether the food would last, whether the roof would hold if snow fell heavy again, whether spring would ever arrive. In those quiet, solitary moments, hope became an act of rebellion. To believe in the next sunrise, that was faith enough. Yet, even in hardship, there was beauty. the soft light of the moon spilling through a crack in the roof, glinting off frost-covered walls, the sound of an infant breathing softly beside its mother, the sigh of a father drifting to sleep after endless labor. Life, fragile but unbroken, breathing beneath layers of wool and straw. Outside, the night stretched endlessly, cold and merciless. Wolves roamed the forests, ice thickened on rivers, and the stars seemed distant and uncaring. But within those small homes, humanity burned quietly, not as a blaze, but as an ember, steady and enduring. And as each peasant family drifted into uneasy dreams, the fire dimmed to its final glow, a soft pulsing heartbeat in the heart of winter. The night had claimed the world once more, but it had not yet claimed them. They would face tomorrow, together.
The battle for warmth. The night had no mercy. By midwinter, the cold was not just a presence, it was a predator. It crept through walls, slid under doors, and waited for fires to die. Every peasant knew that warmth was not comfort, it was survival. The battle began the moment the sun disappeared. Inside those fragile huts, built of mud, straw, and sticks, the smallest ember was guarded like treasure. The fire pit was the heart of the home, a blackened circle in the center of a dirt floor. It smoked endlessly, staining the ceiling dark with soot, but no one dared complain. Smoke meant fire, and fire meant life. During the day, children collected whatever could burn: wood, dried grass, bits of peat, even animal dung. Wood was scarce. Forests were often owned by lords, and cutting trees without permission could cost a hand or a life. So peasants learned to be clever. They made fuel bricks from mud mixed with straw and manure, dried under the weak sun. These bricks burned slow, smoky, but steady, a poor man's miracle. As the sun vanished, families gathered close. They crouched around the fire, feeding it piece by piece, as if whispering prayers to a living God. Sparks leapt up like stars, then died in the cold air. Every flame mattered. Every bit of wood had a name. The crackle of fire was a lullaby, harsh, imperfect, but endlessly familiar. But warmth did not come only from flame. It came from life itself. Peasant houses were not only homes for humans. Animals, goats, sheep, pigs, even chickens, slept inside, separated only by low wooden partitions or piles of straw. The warmth of their breath, the steam from their bodies, filled the room. It was not glamorous. It smelled of hay, sweat, and manure, yet when the wind screamed outside, that living heat became sacred. Many families placed their sleeping areas closest to the animals, sometimes using the livestock as windbreakers. In the worst winters, they even shared the same space, children snuggling between parents, goats curled near their feet, hens roosting on beams above. Privacy vanished, but survival bloomed. To keep the heat inside, walls were patched constantly. Straw was stuffed into cracks, moss pressed between gaps, and dung smeared thickly to seal air leaks. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. The walls looked rough, uneven, almost alive, as if the earth itself had tried to protect them. Still, no matter how carefully they sealed the walls, the wind always found a way in. Sometimes it howled so fiercely, the fire guttered and nearly died. Then someone, often the mother, would kneel by the hearth, shielding it with her hands, whispering softly as if to a child. "Stay with us," she might murmur to the flame.
Please don't go. The battle for warmth was also a battle against smoke. Without chimneys, smoke lingered inside, coiling upward until it filled the small hut. Eyes watered, lungs burned, children coughed. Some families cut small holes near the roof to let the smoke escape, but that also let in the cold. Every decision was a gamble: breathe smoke or freeze. Most chose smoke. At least, smoke meant heat. At night, the fire was banked carefully, covered with ashes to keep embers alive till morning. The glow beneath the gray surface was a promise: we will awake again. Some families kept a small child or elderly member responsible for watching the fire. To fall asleep and let it die was unthinkable. If the fire went out, the cold would creep in like death itself. And yet, despite the discomfort, there were moments of strange peace. Imagine it: a small room filled with sleeping forms, the soft breathing of animals, the crackle of a low fire, steam rising faintly from damp wool, a mother's hand resting on her child's shoulder. Outside, the snow falls silently, the stars unseen. Inside, a fragile warmth hums quietly, built from nothing but patience and will. That warmth was more than heat. It was a symbol, proof that humanity could outlast even the cruelest night. It meant love without words, sacrifice without question. Every father who rose before dawn to fetch wood, every mother who shielded the flame from the wind, every child who pressed against a sibling to share body heat, they were soldiers in an endless silent war. Sometimes, when the cold became unbearable, they told themselves that warmth was a gift from God, a reward for faith or for hard work. Others saw it as luck. But deep down, every villager knew warmth was not given, it was made. And so they made it, with fire, with straw, with bodies, with hope. In that little hut of smoke and straw, surrounded by darkness and snow, the peasants of medieval Europe built their own sun each night, small, flickering, fragile, but bright enough to keep death at bay till morning. By dawn, the ashes would glow faintly again, the room gray with smoke and frost. Someone would stir, cough, and rise to feed the embers once more. The battle for warmth never truly ended. It only paused until the next sunset. And every night, as they gathered once more around the trembling fire, they whispered the same silent prayer: "Let the flame live. Let us live." Hunger and the empty table. The fire still burned, but the food was gone. By midwinter, warmth could be fought for, but hunger was merciless. It gnawed quietly, day after day, until even the strongest began to tremble at the sight of an empty pot. The peasants called it the hollow season, the months when the last of the grain ran out, when the salted meat turned to dust, when even the rats began to disappear. For many families, it was not a question of what to eat, but whether there would be anything left at all. In the dim glow of morning, a mother stirred a pot of thin gruel, her face gray as the ashes beneath the hearth. She added more water than oats, stretched the meal till it barely clung to the spoon. Around her children waited, eyes hollow, hands wrapped around wooden bowls that once seemed too big, now pitifully small. Each spoonful was measured like gold. The youngest fed first, the parents last. Sometimes the parents did not eat at all. The medieval world was built on a rhythm: sow, reap, store, endure. But winter broke that rhythm. The fields lay dead, the earth locked in ice. Hunting was rare, fishing impossible when rivers froze. What remained were the stores they had managed to hide from rats, mold, and thieves. But even preservation had its limits. Salt was precious, often more valuable than coin, and those who had little could not afford to preserve much. Smokehouses stood silent, their hooks empty. In each cottage, clay jars held what was left: pickled turnips, dried peas, maybe a lump of lard wrapped in cloth. Those jars were opened sparingly, reverently, like holy relics. By late January, even those jars were bare. That was when the real hunger began. It wasn't just the stomach that ached, it was the mind. People dreamed of bread. They dreamed of feasts long forgotten, of roasted meat, of honey and fruit they had tasted only once in their lives. Sometimes the dreams were so vivid they woke with tears on their faces. The elders said hunger could make a man see ghosts, and maybe it did. Some swore they saw their dead relatives standing near the fire, offering food that vanished as soon as they reached for it. Others said they heard whispers in the wind, promising warmth and plenty if they only followed the sound. Most stayed inside. The cold wasn't the only thing that could kill. To keep spirits up, families turned to faith. Each meal, however small, began with a prayer. "Thank you, Lord, for this gift," they whispered, even if that gift was a crust of bread too hard to chew. The church taught that hunger was a test, that patience and humility would earn divine mercy. For many, faith became the only nourishment left. Mothers bore the heaviest burden. They learned how to make nothing look like something: boiled straw to make broth look thicker, crushed acorns to stretch flour. Some chewed food first before giving it to their children, pretending they weren't hungry. They smiled when they could, small, tired smiles that said, "You eat, I'll be fine." Fathers faced the world outside. Some begged from neighboring villages, others bartered tools, clothes, even wedding rings for a bit of grain. There were darker moments too: stolen chickens, missing turnips, footprints in the snow leading nowhere. Hunger made men desperate, and desperation had no morals. Still, the community tried to help one another. When one family found a little, they shared, even if it meant less for themselves. A loaf of bread was divided by hands trembling with gratitude. There was no greed left in winter, only the slow-burning mercy of the poor. At night, hunger became something else, not just pain, but silence. Children slept early to forget it. The elderly murmured prayers under their breath. The fire crackled weakly, unable to warm what hunger had already hollowed out. The smell of smoke replaced the smell of food, and yet, even in that silence, life persisted. Sometimes, on rare nights, someone would sing. Old lullabies, half-forgotten hymns, songs that once echoed in warmer seasons. The notes floated gently through the smoke, fragile and pure, like a reminder that there was still beauty left in the world. In those moments, something shifted. Hunger might rule their bodies, but it could not consume their spirit. They still loved, still hoped, still believed that spring would come, because it always did. And when the first bird sang in the cold dawn, a small, cracked song from a frost-bitten tree, the peasants smiled through their weakness. It was proof that winter would end, that life, though beaten and starved, would return. In that hope lay their true strength, not the strength to fight hunger, but the strength to endure it.
The frozen church bells. The village slept under a thick blanket of frost. Outside, the wind howled against the fragile wattle and daub walls, and snow piled silently over the thatched roofs. Within this frozen world, life continued, quietly stubborn, refusing to surrender to winter's cruelty. The church, standing on the highest hill, was more than a building. Its stone walls, icy and gray, held the pulse of the community. Inside, the small congregation gathered each morning and evening, their breath visible in the chill air, hands clasped tightly, eyes closed in whispered prayer. They leaned into faith the way they leaned into their families, for warmth, for protection, for life. The church bells rarely rang in the dead of winter. The metal stiffened in the cold. The ropes froze solid. Yet even silent, the church communicated its presence. Its shadow stretched over the frozen village like a watchful guardian. To the villagers, the absence of sound was not absence of hope. Bells were optional. Belief was not. Inside, candles flickered, throwing gold and shadow across cold stone floors. The priest, bundled in heavy wool and fur, recited prayers that carried like warmth through the body. Families knelt together, shoulders brushing, hands clasped over trembling knees. Even children, tiny and cold, imitated the movements of their elders, memorizing gestures and words they did not fully understand. Faith was learned through body and ritual, not only language. Small festivals punctuated the long, frozen months. Saints' days, Christmas, Candlemas, each brought a rare feast or sweet treat. A turnip might be sliced more generously, a bit of honey reserved, and for a brief evening the world seemed larger, gentler, and warmer. Stories of miracles, saints who fed the hungry or healed the sick, were recounted beside the hearth, their words weaving hope into the very walls of the cottages. The church provided more than religious comfort. It was a social anchor, a place where villagers shared news, exchanged small gifts, or lent tools. Even in extreme cold, the bonds of community were strengthened here. One family might bring firewood for another. A neighbor might share a handful of dried peas. In the face of winter, these gestures were as valuable as any blessing. The children were fascinated by church tales. Every week they huddled near the altar, listening to stories of saints who endured hunger, storms, or exile. They learned that survival was not only about strength, but about patience, humility, and hope. Saints, too, were hungry, the priest would say, his voice echoing faintly off the stone. Yet they endured. So shall you. Even the harshest nights were softened by ritual. Lighting a candle, saying a prayer, crossing oneself, these simple acts became lifelines. The small flame glimmered against the darkness, both inside the church and within each heart. It reminded the villagers that the cold and the night were temporary, that morning and mercy would return. Occasionally, the priest would take a bell and carefully ring it, even if it rang faintly or cracked in the cold. That single sound rolled across the snow, carrying a strange, exhilarating hope. It reminded everyone that even the smallest action, even a fragile note of faith, could pierce the silence of winter. Families returned home from church with hearts a little lighter. Children clutched their parents' hands, repeating prayers under their breath, imagining miracles they might see the next day. The elderly smiled, warmed by community and ritual alike. The fire awaited them, embers glowing patiently, and the cycle of survival continued, bolstered not only by food or clothing, but by belief, by hope, by the invisible hand of faith guiding them through the darkest months. Even when the snow piled high and roads became impassable, the church remained a beacon. It symbolized endurance, the human capacity to persevere when the elements were cruel, when hunger gnawed, and when the night stretched endlessly. Villagers knew they were not alone. The cold could not touch the strength of belief, nor could it sever the bonds that connected families and communities through shared prayers and rituals. And so the frozen bells, though silent they were, rang in the hearts of everyone. They spoke of survival, resilience, and unity. They told the story of humanity standing firm against the merciless winter, holding on to hope when everything else seemed to fade. By the time the hearths burned low and families returned to their shared straw beds, the world outside was an endless white expanse. Yet within those tiny cottages, warmth persisted, in bodies pressed together, in whispered prayers, in the faint flickering glow of hope that refused to die. The frozen church bells did not need to chime. Faith itself had already spoken.
Medieval hygiene and survival. Winter was a relentless enemy, and cold, dirt, and disease marched together through the village. For the medieval peasant, survival was measured not only by warmth or food, but also by the tenuous battle for cleanliness. Hygiene was not luxury. It was a quiet, stubborn weapon against illness. Bathing was rare. A river might freeze solid. A well provide water that felt like ice against the skin. Most families washed only once a week, if at all, and the bath was often a shared experience. Children huddled in wooden tubs, parents crouched beside them, pouring buckets of lukewarm water sparingly. The air inside the small huts was damp and heavy, steam rising in spirals, carrying the scent of straw, smoke, and human skin. Clothing was another critical line of defense. Peasants layered wool and linen as armor against frostbite, sweat, and infection. Every article had a purpose. Tunics, cloaks, and caps were patched repeatedly, sometimes with older, worn garments. Layers trapped heat, but they also trapped lice and fleas, companions no one could fully escape. Mothers combed and inspected hair as best they could, while children squirmed, impatient, but too cold to protest. Sanitation was simple but precarious. Most houses had no indoor latrine. Chamber pots were common, emptied at dawn or dusk into the frozen fields. Waste was a dangerous, omnipresent companion, providing nourishment for vermin, spreading disease, and reminding villagers that even privacy was a fragile luxury. During the bitterest nights, it was common for entire families to share space above the frozen earth, negotiating proximity to chamber pots, animals, and each other. Menstruation added another layer of difficulty. Women managed without privacy, using homemade cloth pads, often washed in icy water or buried under straw until clean. There were no mirrors, no discreet disposal. Everything was handled quietly, pragmatically, almost invisibly. Survival dictated this unglamorous routine. Warmth and shared shelter took precedence over shame. Children learned hygiene through imitation and instruction. Even young girls and boys understood that dirty hands spread illness, that bathing when possible preserved health, and that clothing needed careful layering and mending. Parents demonstrated patience and ritual, washing faces at dawn, scrubbing hands before meals, and using straw or moss as makeshift toilet paper. Every small act of cleanliness was a lesson in endurance, creativity, and survival. Illness lurked at every corner. Frostbite, respiratory infections, lice, fleas, and stomach ailments thrived in close quarters. A single sick child could infect the whole family, and with medicine scarce, prevention was the only option. Fires, smoke, clean water when available, and diligent attention to bedding and clothing, these small, laborious acts were as vital as any weapon in the fight against winter's cruelty. Even communal hygiene had its challenges. Large families shared tubs, blankets, and hearth space. They shared warmth, yes, but also the constant presence of cold, dirt, and the irritants that came with survival. Parents negotiated quietly, ensuring that each child and adult received some measure of comfort, that water remained warm enough for washing, that straw bedding was shifted to reduce damp and chill. It was laborious, exhausting, and essential. Despite these hardships, moments of human ingenuity shone. Women crafted makeshift soap from animal fat and ash. Linen rags were boiled to kill lice. Straw and moss were carefully layered beneath beds and in walls to reduce moisture and chill. Even chamber pots were treated with care, ensuring that waste was buried or burned whenever possible to minimize disease. These small victories, repeated daily, kept life from slipping into despair. Hygiene was inseparable from warmth and nutrition. A clean child, wrapped in layers of wool, fed a small portion of porridge, had a better chance of surviving the night. Illness meant lost labor, lost warmth, and in the coldest months, potentially death. Every parent understood this instinctively. Teaching a child to care for their own clothing, to wash hands, or to share limited clean water, these were acts of love, education, and survival simultaneously. Even in the darkest, coldest nights, hygiene rituals became a form of emotional stability. Children who dreaded icy water laughed when splashes reached their faces. Adults smiled at the brief warmth of a wash, and families huddled together after each bath, skin still damp, breathing in each other's heat. These small human connections preserved morale, and morale preserved life. In the rare moments when water flowed from a thawed stream or melted snow, the entire village would take advantage. Washing, mending, laundering, each task a reminder of survival's rhythm. The simplest pleasure, a clean face or hair combed, became a luxury, a small victory, a defiance of winter itself. By the end of the day, the tubs emptied, clothes layered once more, chamber pots dealt with, and the family huddled near the hearth. Each act of hygiene, no matter how modest or uncomfortable, had strengthened the household's chance at surviving another night. Fire, warmth, and clean bodies intertwined in a fragile balance that sustained life. In a world where frost, hunger, and disease threatened constantly, hygiene was not vanity. It was resilience. It was love. It was survival. Even in the coldest winter, the villagers emerged from their small huts, their hair damp, their clothes patched, their hands rough, and their hearts quietly triumphant. For every wash, every scrub, every carefully wrapped child, they had claimed life, not just for the moment, but for the night to come. And as the fire glowed in the hearth and snow whispered against the roof, the medieval peasant understood the truth. Survival was not just about warmth or food. It was about the little acts of care that kept hope alive, one day, one night, and one clean hand at a time.
Winter work and the labors of survival. The dawn came slow, a faint gray light filtering through frost-caked windows. Winter did not forgive the lazy, nor did it wait for the tired. Survival demanded labor, constant and unyielding, even when the air stung with 1,000 tiny needles of ice. The men rose first, or those assigned the heaviest burdens. Snow and frost made every movement deliberate. Paths to the fields were slippery, boots stiff with frozen mud. Axes bit reluctantly into frozen firewood. Saws groaned against ice-hardened logs. The cold numbed fingers, even through layers of wool, and every hour of labor was a battle against the frost itself. Livestock demanded relentless attention. Goats, sheep, and pigs were not merely food. They were warmth, trade, and hope. Each animal was fed carefully. Hay and stored vegetables distributed sparingly, calculated to last until the next thaw. Milk was collected from reluctant cows, churned slowly into butter, then stored in the cold corner of the home. Every task was both routine and urgent. Delay could mean starvation, sickness, or the loss of the precious animals themselves. Women managed the hearth and household chores with the same tireless dedication. Cooking, cleaning, mending, and caring for children consumed the daylight hours. Boiling water for laundry in frozen tubs, repairing torn clothing, or crafting insulation from straw and moss, these were not optional chores. They were survival strategies. Women became architects of warmth and guardians of life, their fingers raw, their faces reddened by smoke and frost, yet unyielding. Children were neither idle nor spared. Even the youngest carried small bundles of wood, fed chickens, or tended to fire embers. Each chore was a lesson: how to measure food, how to handle frozen water, how to move carefully across ice without falling. They learned the rhythms of survival, the subtle signals of weather, the language of frost and snow. Mistakes were costly, but necessary. A scraped hand or frozen toe became an early teacher in endurance. The division of labor was practical and precise. Men handled heavy work outdoors, cutting wood, repairing fences, checking fields, gathering firewood from the forest's edge. Women and older girls managed indoor tasks, cooking, preserving food, washing and mending, attending to the sick. Children filled the gaps, their energy and curiosity harnessed into useful tasks. This organization was not arbitrary. It was the product of generations who understood that coordination was the difference between life and death in winter. Labor in extreme cold was exhausting and dangerous. Fingers went numb in minutes. Boots and gloves offered minimal protection against frostbite. Tools cracked against frozen timber. Buckets splintered when fetching icy water. Every misstep carried risk. A fall could break a bone. An axe slip could end life. Yet the peasants moved with rhythm and caution, their bodies attuned to the bitter reality of winter. Experience was survival, repetition, endurance, focus, life itself. Despite hardship, there was camaraderie. Neighbors checked on one another, offering help with heavy loads or trading labor for food. Children might work together to move a frozen cart or herd animals across ice-laden paths. Adult coordination was a subtle dance. Shared effort reduced risk, increased efficiency, and built the bonds that would carry the community through the coldest months. Even small victories were celebrated quietly. A log split without cracking, a fire maintained through the night, a herd safely returned to the pen. Each was noted, often with a brief smile, a nod, or a whispered word of thanks. Survival was not merely about labor. It was about attention, care, and the relentless recognition of what was precious, life itself. Every day followed this rhythm: wake, labor, eat, maintain, sleep, repeated endlessly under the pale winter sun. Yet within this monotony, the villagers found subtle joys: a child laughing while carrying a bundle of hay, a mother teaching a girl to mend woolen socks, a father sharing a crust of bread with a neighbor. Labor became a medium for connection, for teaching, and for hope. By evening, fatigue settled heavily. Bodies ached from hours of work, faces reddened and cracked, hands blistered. Yet the day's work left the home warmer, the animals fed, the fire alive, and food preserved. Each task completed was a victory over the merciless cold. And as night fell and the hearth glowed softly against frost-bitten walls, the peasants of the medieval winter village closed their eyes. Their bodies were tired, their fingers stiff, their muscles sore, yet inside,
Each heart pulsed with survival, with pride, and with the unspoken promise that they would continue their labor tomorrow and the next day, and every day until spring finally returned.
Winter clothing, layering, and survival armor. Winter was not a season. It was a relentless adversary. The cold bit through bones, froze fingers to tools, and seeped into the heart of every hut. Survival depended not only on fire and food, but on clothing, a second skin against the merciless frost. For medieval peasants, every garment had a purpose. Wool tunics, sometimes layered 3 or 4 deep, were the core of daily survival. Linen shirts beneath provided comfort, while thick wool cloaks outside shielded against wind and snow. Even a simple hat or hood could mean the difference between frostbitten ears and warmth. Every piece was precious, repaired constantly, passed down and layered carefully. Layering was an art born of necessity. Clothes were stacked, wrapped, tied, and adjusted according to wind, snow, and the physical labor of the day. A man venturing into the forest to chop wood might wear a base layer of linen, followed by a woolen tunic, a patched coat, and a fur-lined cloak. Mittens made of layered wool protected his fingers, while leather boots insulated his feet from frozen ground. Every layer trapped air. Every fold conserved heat. Every strap and knot mattered. Women managed their layers with equal care. Long skirts were tucked and doubled, woolen shawls wrapped over shoulders, and fur-lined caps or hoods protected their heads. Layers allowed mobility and warmth simultaneously. In the cramped huts, women would help each other adjust cloaks, tuck scarves, or fasten buttons that had loosened. Clothing was both armor and comfort, a shield against the season's cruelty. Children wore smaller versions of adult garments, often hand-me-downs patched multiple times. Their tiny bodies needed careful attention. Mothers ensured sleeves were snug, stockings thick, and scarves tied tightly around necks. Children learned quickly which layer to remove or add depending on activity, temperature, or frost's bite. Clothing was not decoration, it was instruction in survival. Repair was constant. Holes, worn spots, frayed hems, nothing was discarded lightly. A patch sewn with care could extend a garment's life for months. Reused fabric, scraps of wool, old furs, even extra straw tucked inside garments served to trap warmth. Peasants became skilled tailors by necessity, improvising insulation with creativity and precision. Fur was a precious commodity. Even small scraps lining the collar of a coat or the edge of a hat dramatically improved warmth. Those who had access to fur, often from hunting or trade, treated it with reverence, careful not to damage it. Fur became a symbol of survival, even status, in the frozen landscape. Protection against frostbite was a daily concern. Gloves were doubled or lined with wool. Mittens often held small pieces of straw for extra insulation. Boots were layered with cloth or moss, sometimes even tied with leather strips to reduce drafts. Caps covered ears and scarves wrapped around necks, faces, and mouths when winds screamed across the village. A simple layer might mean life. Neglect could bring pain or permanent injury. Clothing also held social and cultural meaning. Colors, embroidery, or patches signaled family, craft, or village identity. Even in extreme poverty, peasants found ways to express identity through garments. A stitched pattern here, or a fur trim there. Survival and culture were intertwined. The same coat that kept you alive also told a story of belonging. The process of dressing itself was ritualistic. Each morning, garments were layered carefully, buttons adjusted, cloaks tied, mittens tucked into sleeves. Each family member helped another.
Mothers guided children. Fathers ensured warmth for work outside. Older siblings checked younger ones. Clothing became a shared act of care, a reinforcement of familial bonds, and a daily affirmation of life amidst hardship. Even sleep involved layering. Straw beds were topped with thick blankets, furs, or layered wool quilts. Children and parents shared warmth, often wearing day clothes to conserve heat. Extra layers of clothing between humans and straw acted as both insulation and protection from lice or fleas. Every night was a careful negotiation between comfort, survival, and space. Clothing was closely tied to movement and labor. Those venturing outside had to balance insulation with mobility. Too many layers could slow wood chopping or snow clearing. Too few layers could lead to frostbite. The peasants learned through trial, error, and experience. Each winter, a new lesson in survival attire. Even minor details mattered. Straps on shoes tied tightly to prevent snow entry, collars folded to shield necks, hoods adjusted for maximum coverage without obscuring vision. Every garment was multifunctional, every fold and stitch deliberate. Survival required discipline, observation, and careful maintenance of clothing as an extension of the body. The emotional aspect was profound. Clothing was comfort, security, and reassurance. Pulling a warm wool cloak around shoulders, adjusting mittens, or wrapping a child in layers was a tactile reminder that life continued, that survival was possible, that warmth could be shared even when the world outside was frozen and merciless. And as the fire crackled, snow pressed against the hut, and the family huddled together under layers of wool and fur, each person understood the profound truth. The right clothing could save life, preserve hope, and sustain humanity through the coldest night.
Children and education in winter. Winter was harsh, but it was also a classroom. For children of the medieval village, survival was inseparable from learning. From the first frost to the final thaw, their days were filled with lessons disguised as chores, games, and quiet observation. Each day demanded attention, endurance, and creativity. The morning began early, even before dawn. Children huddled close to parents for warmth, blankets drawn over shoulders, small hands tucked beneath woolen layers. The first tasks were practical: feeding chickens, gathering firewood splinters, or carrying water from frozen wells. Even these mundane chores were instructional. They learned to measure, to prioritize, and to anticipate the hazards of frost, ice, and exhaustion. Education was not limited to labor. Inside the dimly lit huts, elders told stories of saints, miracles, and ancient village legends. These oral histories carried moral lessons, social norms, and practical survival strategies. A tale of a saint who endured famine taught patience and ingenuity. A story of a clever child who navigated a winter storm illustrated caution, observation, and resourcefulness. Through these stories, children absorbed culture, ethics, and knowledge vital for survival. Some families had rudimentary reading materials, scraps of parchment, alphabet blocks, or simple prayer books. Children practiced letters and prayers by candlelight or near the hearth. Writing was a privilege, but even a small inscription taught dexterity, patience, and mental discipline. Mistakes were corrected gently. Success was celebrated quietly. Each word learned was a step toward both literacy and survival, as the ability to read instructions, prayers, or simple records could be crucial in emergencies. Apprenticeship began early. Boys learned trades from fathers, older brothers, or neighbors: blacksmithing, carpentry,
weaving, or farming. Girls learned household skills, cooking, cleaning, weaving, mending, and childcare. These skills were not abstract. They were vital for winter survival. Learning while working ensured that children could contribute meaningfully to their families, even in the dead of frost. Play, too, was part of education. Even in freezing temperatures, children found ways to amuse themselves. Snow was transformed into forts or obstacles. Sticks became swords. Games of tag or simple ball play honed agility and balance. Play was more than recreation. It built coordination, resilience, and teamwork. A child who could navigate icy terrain safely could deliver messages, herd animals, or fetch wood with less risk. Learning through play was learning for life. Family guidance was constant. Parents, older siblings, and neighbors provided instruction through demonstration. A mother would show how to properly layer clothing, a father how to split wood, a grandmother how to prepare medicinal herbs. Children learned by imitation first, correction second. Mistakes were instructive. Patience, repetition, and attention to detail were drilled gently but firmly. Survival skills were not taught abstractly. They were embedded in the rhythm of daily life. Religious education played a central role. Even young children attended small sessions at the church or in the home with elders reading from prayer books. They memorized prayers, learned moral lessons, and absorbed a sense of duty, community, and hope. Saints' stories were both entertaining and instructive, modeling courage, endurance, and piety. Winter, with its long nights and harsh conditions, amplified the value of these lessons. A child who internalized moral courage and patience could better withstand both hunger and frost. Meal times became additional lessons. Children learned to measure portions, stretch rations, and prioritize the most vulnerable members of the family. Sharing, patience, and observation of hunger cues were subtle yet crucial aspects of education. They internalized the logic of scarcity, the importance of rationing, and the skills needed to sustain both body and mind through the bleakest months. Night brought reflection and quiet learning. After chores and study, children huddled in shared straw beds, whispering stories or repeating prayers under the thin light of a small candle or flickering hearth. They processed lessons learned throughout the day, recalled stories, rehearsed tasks for tomorrow, and imagined themselves performing successfully. These nightly rituals nurtured resilience, memory, and emotional intelligence, all vital for enduring winter's challenges. By the time darkness fully enveloped the village, children were exhausted but enriched. Their bodies had labored, their minds had absorbed lessons of history, faith, and survival, and their spirits had found small joys to carry them through the long night. Every day, through chore, story, play, and prayer, they became more capable, more resilient, and more prepared to inherit the harsh world of the medieval winter. Winter education was not gentle nor easy, but it was effective. It forged children who could survive frost, hunger, and isolation, who could contribute to their families and communities, and who could maintain hope and morality even under extreme hardship. And as they drifted into sleep, pressed close to parents and siblings, warm under layers of wool, blankets, and fur, the children carried the lessons of winter with them: vigilance, patience, courage, creativity, and above all, the understanding that survival, learning, and love were inseparable.
Winter festivals and communal gatherings. Winter was harsh, yet it was punctuated by light, brief, flickering celebrations that brought warmth not from the hearth alone, but from shared humanity. Medieval peasants, enduring frost, hunger, and isolation relied on festivals to stitch together hope and joy during the longest nights. The village church was the heart of celebration. On Christmas, candlelight glimmered against the frost-laden windows, casting shadows across stone floors and wooden pews. Families gathered, bundled in layers of wool and fur, huddled together for warmth, hands clasped in prayer. Children whispered excitement, their breaths visible in the cold air, as elders recounted the story of the Nativity, embellishing it with familiar local tales and miracles. Music followed. Flutes, fiddles, and small drums provided rhythm, though instruments were often scarce. Singing arose in voices roughened by cold, yet rich in emotion. Hymns and folk songs blended seamlessly, carrying messages of endurance, faith, and communal pride. Even those too tired to dance found solace in tapping feet or clapping hands, a small defiance against winter's gloom. Feasting was modest but significant. Salted pork, turnips, grains, and rare treats like honey or dried fruit were shared liberally, carefully portioned to ensure no one went hungry during the celebration. Families pooled resources, contributing small items to communal meals. The act of sharing was ritual as well as survival. Food became a tangible expression of solidarity, generosity, and hope. Yule, celebrated with the longest night, emphasized warmth and light. Logs, often decorated with sprigs of holly or evergreen, burned slowly in hearths, their smoke curling through crowded cottages. Stories of ancestors, spirits, and village heroes were told around these fires, entertaining children and reminding adults of continuity and resilience. In these moments, the line between survival and celebration blurred. Warmth, food, and storytelling became inseparable. Candlemas brought quiet reflection. Candles were blessed in the church, and their light guided villagers home through snow-covered paths. Children carried small candles in procession, learning rituals that connected faith with daily life. Each flame symbolized endurance, protection, and the promise that even in darkness, light returned. The lessons of winter were embedded in these rituals: patience, preparation, and communal care. Saints' days were often lively occasions mixing the sacred with the practical benefit. Pilgrimages to local shrines, communal prayers, and even small markets allowed villagers to exchange goods, gather information, and reinforce social bonds. Music and dance accompanied these gatherings, offering physical warmth and emotional release. Children watched and imitated, learning cultural norms and social etiquette even as they played in the snow-laden courtyards. Festivals also reinforced identity. Each village, even isolated in winter's harsh grip, maintained traditions unique to its history. Decorations, songs, and foods conveyed lineage, craft, and pride. The continuity of celebration offered reassurance that, despite frost, famine, or illness, the community persisted. Rituals were acts of resistance, acts of unity, and subtle affirmations of life itself. Even small, improvised games held symbolic significance. Children might race across snow-packed paths, balance on frozen streams, or reenact tales of local saints. These games taught skill, courage, coordination, and teamwork. Play became preparation for survival, allowing children to practice movement, assess risk, and develop resilience, all under the guise of festive joy. Preparation for festivals itself was labor-intensive. Firewood had to be gathered and dried, food preserved and portioned, garments cleaned and patched. Women worked tirelessly to create warmth and sustenance. Men ensured security and structure, and children assisted wherever possible. The combined effort was a tangible demonstration of communal cooperation, and the resulting celebrations rewarded their endurance with rare moments of comfort and happiness. Even in the bleakest winters, laughter echoed through cottages, churches, and courtyards. A child's giggle, a neighbor's jest,
the clapping of hands during a song, these fleeting sounds carried far more than amusement. They were psychological lifelines, strengthening morale, nurturing hope, and reminding villagers that survival was both a shared challenge and a shared triumph. And as the village slept, cocooned in blankets, cloaks, and shared warmth, the echoes of music, laughter, and stories lingered, a testament that even in winter's harsh grip, the human spirit remained unbroken.
Illness, medicine, and winter remedies. Winter was not just cold, it was an invisible enemy. The same frost that hardened earth and slowed rivers also crept into bodies, weakening them, making coughs linger and infections fester. For medieval peasants, illness during the long winter months was a constant threat, a shadow lurking over every household. Common winter illnesses struck predictably. Frostbite claimed fingers and toes when gloves were insufficient, toes frozen in damp boots. Coughs and colds began innocently, then escalated into fevers, chills, and sometimes pneumonia. Children, elderly, and the malnourished were especially vulnerable. 1 week of mild fever could become a life-threatening ordeal. Every sneeze, cough, or shiver was observed carefully, and families reacted swiftly. Medical knowledge was rudimentary. There were no hospitals for peasants. Doctors were rare and expensive. Families relied on herbal remedies, superstition, and passed-down wisdom. Leaves, roots, barks, and flowers were brewed into teas, boiled into poultices, or crushed into powders. Elderly women often held the greatest knowledge: which herb soothed coughs, which root reduced fever, and which combination would strengthen a child's weak stomach. Every family had a small, humble apothecary of dried herbs tucked near the hearth, ready for winter emergencies. Fevered children were wrapped in layers of wool, blankets, and straw, their heads supported, hands kept warm. Parents monitored breathing, counted pulses, and whispered prayers between spoonfuls of thin broth. A mother might apply a poultice of onion or garlic to a child's chest, believing the pungent odor would drive illness away. Fathers adjusted firewood carefully, ensuring warmth without smoke suffocating the sick. These acts were both medical and emotional, blending care with survival instinct. Preventive measures were central to survival. Families layered clothing to maintain body heat, ensuring circulation remained strong. Damp bedding was avoided, hearths kept alive, water boiled or melted from snow, and hands were scrubbed in frigid water when possible. Diet was critical. Preserved root vegetables, small portions of salted meat, and limited grains provided minimal sustenance but were enough to sustain weakened bodies. Every preventative act was a calculation, a daily effort to stay one step ahead of disease. Herbs from the nearby forest were treasured: willow bark for pain, thyme for coughs, sage for digestion, mint to calm stomachs. Each plant had a known purpose. Gathering herbs required caution. Snow and ice made forests treacherous. Mothers and older children often ventured for short trips, wrapped in layers, carrying small baskets to harvest leaves and roots. Nature provided medicine, but at the risk of frostbite, injury, or exhaustion. Every trip was a negotiation between survival and necessity. Emotional impact of illness was profound. Fever, chills, and coughing were not just physical challenges. They induced fear, anxiety, and a sense of helplessness. Families huddled together, whispering encouragement, praying and telling stories to distract the sick from pain. The psychological component of care was as essential as herbal remedies. Hope and calm could influence recovery. Even brief relief, a shared blanket or a whispered story could lift the spirits of the afflicted.
Improvisation was a constant necessity. When herbs ran low, families substituted one plant for another, experimented with combinations, or relied on simple methods like warm compresses, massage, or steam inhalation. Chamber pots were kept nearby to reduce movement, minimizing exposure to the cold. Clothing layers were adjusted frequently to maintain optimal warmth, and the sick were monitored constantly. Survival was a blend of instinct, observation, and hands-on care. Trial, error, and experience guiding every decision. Community support mattered. Neighbors exchanged herbal tips, shared small portions of food, or assisted in childcare when a family member fell ill. Knowledge traveled orally, ensuring that even isolated cottages could benefit from collective wisdom. Festivals and gatherings, though not rare in harsh weather, provided opportunities to learn remedies, exchange seeds, and reinforce social bonds, all indirectly contributing to winter survival. Children were taught early to recognize symptoms, to fetch water, or to assist in simple remedies. Observation was education, noting which herbs worked, how heat affected recovery, and how to balance comfort with exposure. By learning these small, critical skills, children became active participants in the family's survival strategy. Illness was a threat, yes, but also a lesson in responsibility and attentiveness. Even in the harshest winters, families developed small rituals around medicine and care. Hot broths were sipped slowly. Herbal teas warmed chilled hands. Poultices were applied with gentleness. Every step was deliberate, measured, and infused with love. Care became routine, embedding survival strategies into the rhythm of daily life. By evening, when frost painted windows with delicate patterns, the sick were tucked close to the hearth, wrapped in layers, their breathing monitored, meals portioned, and herbs prepared for the night. Every small victory, a cough eased, a fever reduced, a child's pulse steady, was celebrated quietly. Survival was fragile but achievable. Illness was never simply physical. It tested endurance, ingenuity, and emotional resilience. Families who mastered warmth, diet, hygiene, and herbal remedies increased their chances of surviving not only the immediate threat, but the relentless winter itself. Through this combination of care, observation, and community knowledge, medieval peasants created a fragile yet enduring shield against the invisible winter enemy. And so, as night descended, the village, blanketed in snow and quiet, continued its rhythm. Fires glowed through windows, children and elders slept, and families silently reinforced their knowledge and strategies, ready to confront illness and frost alike with renewed vigilance at dawn. In medieval winter, survival was inseparable from care. Medicine, herbs, warmth, hygiene, and emotional support were woven together, a tapestry of resilience and love. The sick were not abandoned. They were protected, nurtured, and fought for, as every family understood that survival depended on vigilance, skill, and compassion. And so, through frost-bitten nights and snow-laden days, medieval peasants endured, patched, and healed, a testament to human ingenuity and determination amidst the coldest, most unyielding winters.
Winter food, storage, and preservation. Winter was relentless, and food scarcity was an ever-present shadow. For medieval peasants, surviving the long, icy months depended on foresight, preparation, and ingenuity. Each household was a fragile ecosystem, carefully managing the resources harvested during the brief warmth of spring and summer. Grains were the backbone of survival. Barley, oats, and rye were milled into coarse flour, baked into dense bread, or boiled into porridge. Bread was rationed carefully. Every crumb mattered. Meals were simple, repetitive, but meticulously planned. Root vegetables such as turnips, carrots, and parsnips were stored in cold cellars, layered in straw to prevent freezing. Every root was inspected, trimmed, and rotated, a daily ritual that could determine whether a family would endure the season or succumb to hunger. Preserved meat was a rare but vital treasure. Salted pork or beef hung from rafters or buried in barrels, slowly curing over months. Smoking added flavor and extended shelf life. Even the smallest scraps were repurposed into broths, soups, or stews. Nothing was wasted. Bones were boiled to extract every last bit of nourishment, and leftover fat was saved for cooking or added warmth. Survival demanded both frugality and ingenuity. Dairy was another carefully guarded resource. Butter churned from scarce milk was salted and stored in cold corners. Cheese was aged, often tough but sustaining. Every spoonful provided essential calories during the bitterest days. Eggs, when available, were buried in ash or straw to extend freshness. Preservation was as much art as necessity. The careful balance of temperature, dryness, and storage technique determined whether a family's diet could sustain them through the winter. Daily rationing was critical. Hunger was ever present, but overconsumption early in the season could lead to starvation later. Mothers measured portions precisely, sometimes dividing a loaf or a root vegetable into halves or quarters. Children were fed just enough to maintain strength, while adults sometimes ate less to ensure the youngest and the elderly survived. Rationing was not cruel, it was strategy. Every meal was a negotiation between immediate satisfaction and long-term survival. Cooking was fraught with challenges. Water often had to be melted from snow or carried from frozen wells. Firewood was scarce. Every spark was precious. Cooking had to be efficient, fuel conserved, meals planned for maximum sustenance with minimal waste. Hearths glowed, smoke curling through huts, while families clustered around for warmth, timing every action to make the most of limited heat. Pots and utensils were simple, often shared, yet every stew, porridge, or broth was prepared with precision and care. Resourcefulness extended to every part of food. Vegetable peelings could flavor soups, wilted greens became filler in stews, and stale bread was soaked or fried to stretch meals. Families devised clever ways to ensure nothing edible went unused. Children learned these practices early, understanding that survival required mindfulness and ingenuity in the kitchen as much as in the fields or forests. Storage was both practical and inventive. Cellars dug into the earth remained just above freezing, perfect for preserving vegetables. Barrels of salted meat or pickled vegetables were insulated with straw. Some families used snow-packed boxes or underground pits to extend freshness. Every household developed its own system, honed over generations. Observation was key. Noticing subtle changes in smell, texture, or color could mean the difference between sustenance and spoilage. Communal knowledge mattered. Neighbors shared tips for preserving food, pooling resources for hunting or vegetable storage, and trading surplus. Festivals and gatherings reinforced these skills, offering moments to exchange advice, compare techniques, and learn from each other's successes and failures. Survival was both individual and collective. Food was more than sustenance. It was an emotional lifeline. A hot bowl of porridge, a spoonful of salted butter, or a crust of bread became symbols of care, comfort, and continuity. During the harshest days, families huddled together, sharing meals, stories, and warmth. Each bite was a reaffirmation of life, a small victory against the relentless cold and scarcity. Children participated actively in food preparation. They gathered kindling, chopped vegetables, stirred stews, and learned the delicate balance of timing, heat, and seasoning, even if rudimentary. These lessons were both practical and cultural.
how to feed a family, how to survive winter, and how to respect the preciousness of every morsel. By evening, the hearth glowed warmly, aromatic stews simmering, bread freshly baked or reheated. Families gathered, sharing food, recounting the day's events, and planning tomorrow's meals. Even amidst scarcity, there was joy, the simple pleasure of warmth, nourishment, and togetherness. Meals became both strategy and ritual, sustaining bodies, minds, and spirits alike. Winter food, storage, and preservation were not merely practical. They were lifelines, tests of ingenuity, and measures of endurance. Every preserved root, salted meat, or carefully rationed portion reflected a family's knowledge, discipline, and resilience. Survival depended on observation, preparation, and communal learning, ensuring that even in the harshest conditions, life continued and hope endured. As snow fell outside and the night deepened, families rested, hearts warmed by shared sustenance. Their strategy, ingenuity, and determination were embedded in every morsel, every preserved vegetable, every simmering pot. And so even in the coldest and darkest months, medieval peasants endured, nourished, strengthened, and ready to face the frost again at dawn.
Winter hygiene and sanitation. Winter was merciless, not only in cold, but in the challenges it imposed on hygiene. For medieval peasants, cleanliness was a constant struggle. Frost turned water into ice, froze streams and wells, and made daily bathing nearly impossible. Yet, survival required ingenuity, discipline, and ritualized routines to maintain both hygiene and dignity amidst the harshest months. Bathing was rare but strategic. A tub of warm water might be heated once a week, sometimes shared among family members in sequence, parents first, children next, infants last. The water, reused carefully, was precious. Heat conservation was paramount. Every drop counted. Soap was uncommon. Herbs such as lavender, rosemary, or rue were added to water to provide scent and antiseptic qualities. In lieu of frequent bathing, washing hands, face, and feet was essential. Snow, melted or used as is, allowed basic cleansing. Cloths were dampened, rubbed across skin, and wrung repeatedly. Even minimal cleanliness helped prevent lice, infections, and skin ailments. These routines, though simple, demanded discipline, especially in freezing conditions where prolonged exposure to cold could be dangerous. Toilet practices were pragmatic. Chamber pots were used inside huts for convenience, often lined with straw to absorb waste and reduce odors. Morning and evening, contents were emptied into designated areas outside, far from water sources. Some villages had rudimentary outdoor latrines, simple pits reinforced with wood. Hygiene was a constant negotiation, protecting the household from disease while minimizing exposure to the biting cold. Clothing and skincare were intertwined with hygiene. Garments, layered for warmth, were rarely washed due to water scarcity and freezing temperatures. Instead, airing, brushing, and spot cleaning were common. Straw or dried grasses stuffed between layers absorbed sweat and body oils. Repairs were constant. Patches, stitching, and reinforcement extended the life of every tunic, cloak, and stocking, simultaneously maintaining modesty and hygiene. Gender-specific routines were pronounced. Women managed children's hygiene, washing faces and hands, combing hair, and tending to small wounds. They also ensured menstrual hygiene, using cloths that were washed, dried near the hearth, and carefully reused. Men focused on practical hygiene, ensuring feet remained dry, hands scrubbed after labor, and wounds protected. Children learned early to manage basic personal care, often imitating older siblings or parents. Preventing disease was an underlying priority. cold and unsanitary conditions encouraged lice, scabies, and infections. Herbs were not only for scent, but also medicinal. Crushed rosemary, sage, and thyme repelled insects and treated minor skin ailments. Routine airing of bedding, straw, and clothing reduced infestation. Simple actions, changing straw, rotating bedding, wiping hands before meals, could determine whether a family remained healthy through winter. Hygiene extended beyond the body. Floors, benches, and food preparation areas were swept or brushed. Ash from the hearth was sometimes used to scrub surfaces. Even in tiny huts, spatial awareness mattered, separating sleeping areas from cooking, storing firewood away from bedding, and ensuring adequate airflow reduced dampness, odors, and potential illness. Survival depended on these careful, deliberate measures. Bathing and cleanliness were also social and emotional rituals. Sharing water, helping children wash, or ensuring neighbors had access to communal facilities reinforced bonds. Modesty and privacy were respected as much as possible, with partitions of cloth or careful timing to allow individuals their moment of personal care. Even amidst extreme scarcity, these acts preserved dignity and humanity. Children learned hygiene as a survival skill. Simple routines, washing hands, brushing hair, wiping faces, were enforced consistently. They observed adults caring for wounds, adjusting layers to prevent frostbite, and maintaining bedding. These lessons extended beyond physical cleanliness. Discipline, attentiveness, and foresight were instilled early, preparing them to endure both winter and life. Nighttime hygiene had its own rituals. Before sleep, hands and faces were wiped, teeth rubbed with cloths or ash, and clothing layers adjusted. Chamber pots were emptied, bedding fluffed, and straw rearranged. Every movement, however minor, contributed to comfort, health, and protection against the cold. Even small routines mattered enormously in maintaining physical and mental well-being. Hygiene was inseparable from survival. Neglect could invite disease, frostbite, or social stigma. Observing routines reinforced family cohesion, taught responsibility, and preserved health. Even minor acts, washing hands before meals, airing bedding, patching garments, were deliberate strategies against winter's relentless challenges. Emotional resilience was tied to hygiene. The act of maintaining cleanliness amidst adversity provided control, pride, and reassurance. Families could take tangible action against the harshness of winter through simple, disciplined practices. The warmth of the hearth, the careful layering of clothing, and the smell of herbs combined to offer not only physical protection, but psychological comfort. As night fell, snow blanketing the village and winds howled outside, the family huddled together, clean as circumstances allowed, bedding arranged, clothing layered, and chamber pots emptied. Hygiene was not luxury, it was necessity, strategy, and ritual, a framework for enduring the longest and coldest nights. Even the tiniest detail mattered. A washed face, a combed mane of hair, a straw bed fluffed and aired, each contributed to survival. Medieval peasants understood that hygiene was a form of armor, a protection against illness and despair, and a subtle yet profound assertion of humanity amidst harsh conditions. And so, through frost-laden nights and frozen mornings, families endured. Their careful, disciplined hygiene routines, intertwined with clothing, diet, and care, provided not only health, but dignity, comfort, and hope, essential ingredients in surviving winter's harsh embrace.
Winter work and labor. Winter was relentless, yet work did not stop. For medieval peasants, the rhythm of life continued even under blankets of snow and frost-laden winds. Survival depended on labor, and the cold months demanded both ingenuity and endurance. Every day was structured around tasks that ensured food, warmth, and shelter, even when temperatures plunged and daylight hours shrank. The first light of dawn revealed frozen fields, ice-crusted paths, and livestock huddled for warmth. Men ventured outdoors, layered in wool and leather, tending to animals, breaking ice for water, and cutting firewood. Their breath formed clouds in the frigid air, boots crunching over frost-hardened soil. Every task was a negotiation with cold. A misstep could mean frostbite, exhaustion, or injury. Yet labor was vital. Without firewood, the hearth would die. Without tending animals, the family's food supply would diminish. Without clearing paths, isolation could become deadly. Women adapted indoor routines to winter's constraints. The hearth became a hub of activity, cooking, baking, mending, and preserving food. Wool was spun into thread, cloth was repaired or repurposed, and garments were layered or patched to last the season. Even in darkness, candlelight illuminated meticulous work. Stitching, weaving, and preparation were acts of both survival and artistry. Every household item was maintained with care, for replacement was not an option. Children contributed actively, performing tasks suited to their size and skill. They carried kindling, assisted with animal care, stirred stews, or helped mend clothing. Play and labor blended seamlessly. Balancing on frozen logs became part of their agility training. Lifting small bundles taught strength. Fetching water from ice-covered wells instilled resilience. Labor was education, teaching responsibility, observation, and the critical link between effort and survival. Division of labor was structured but flexible. Men handled heavy physical work, chopping wood, hauling water, clearing snow. Women managed domestic tasks, food preparation, and child supervision. Children adapted to assist wherever needed. Seasonal adaptation was constant. Short daylight hours required precise scheduling. Energy was conserved for essential tasks, and improvised solutions emerged, from insulated gloves to shared labor routines. Survival demanded both efficiency and innovation. Tools were simple but essential. Axes, saws, knives, wooden shovels, and spinning wheels were maintained diligently. Ice often dulled blades, snow dulled wheels, and frozen handles cracked, requiring constant repair. Peasants became craftsmen of necessity, improvising solutions, sharpening blades on stone, oiling wheels with animal fat, and replacing worn ropes. Every tool was precious. Efficiency meant survival. Community collaboration was integral. Villagers assisted each other, sharing labor for heavy tasks, such as splitting firewood or repairing thatched roofs. Knowledge was exchanged: where to find dry wood, how to maintain tools in frost, and how to balance work with conserving heat. Winter work was both solitary and social. Cooperation amplified productivity, reduced risk, and strengthened bonds. Emotional challenges were constant. Cold bites, fatigue sets in quickly, and monotony can erode morale. Yet ritual and routine provided structure. Each completed chore, every bundle of firewood, and every repaired garment became a small victory. Labor was both physical and psychological. The act of producing, maintaining, and contributing sustained not only bodies, but spirits. Animals required continuous attention. Cattle, sheep, and chickens needed feeding, shelter, and protection from frost. Frozen water had to be broken. snow cleared from pens, and hay rationed carefully. Livestock were essential for survival. Milk, meat, wool, and labor depended on their well-being. Neglect was not an option. Responsibility demanded vigilance at all hours. Indoor labor expanded to crafts and preparation. Weaving, spinning, and mending provided clothing. Tool repair enabled outdoor work, and firewood split indoors could supplement hearth fuel. Women taught children these skills, blending patience, precision, and foresight. Work became education, observing technique, learning timing, and understanding the relationship between effort and survival. Cooking, a constant daily task, demanded adaptation. Frozen water had to be melted, fuel carefully rationed, and meals stretched as far as possible. Simple dishes, porridge, stews, and preserved vegetables required ingenuity to maintain flavor, nutrition, and warmth. Food preparation, preservation, and rationing were intertwined with labor, forming a daily rhythm crucial to family survival. Even at night, work continued quietly. Some households rotated night watches, ensuring firewood remained, animals were safe, and equipment was protected. Small tasks, stirring a pot, adjusting clothing layers, patching gloves, ensured readiness for the next day. Every act of labor was part of a larger strategy: endurance, preservation, and preparation. Children's labor intertwined with learning. They observed, assisted, and sometimes improvised solutions for small tasks. Balancing chores with safety and warmth taught critical thinking, responsibility, and resilience. Each day's labor was an education in survival, ethics, and communal contribution. By evening, exhausted but accomplished, families gathered around the hearth. Heat, light, and a shared sense of purpose provided solace. Work had been completed, survival strategies reinforced, and community bonds strengthened. Winter labor was relentless, but it was purposeful, and the rewards, though subtle, were profound. Warmth, nourishment, safety, and hope. Medieval winter work and labor were inseparable from survival. Every chop of wood, every stitch sewn, every animal tended reflected knowledge, skill, and determination. Labor was ritual, necessity, and education. It molded bodies, sharpened minds, and strengthened spirits, ensuring that families endured the frost and snow, prepared for the uncertainties of tomorrow. As night fell, snow blanketed the village, fires glowed faintly, and labor-worn villagers rested, cocooned in layers of warmth, ready to resume the cycle at dawn. Survival, endurance, and resilience were etched in every act of work, a testament to the human capacity to adapt and persist in the harshest of winters.
Clothing, layering, and winter fashion. Winter was not only a battle against cold, it was a canvas for ingenuity. For medieval peasants, clothing was armor against the frost, a tangible shield against the daily cruelty of winter. Every layer, stitch, and patch was a testament to survival, creativity, and communal knowledge. Layering was essential. Wool tunics were worn over linen shirts, sometimes doubled or tripled for insulation. Cloaks, often made from coarse wool or repurposed animal hides, wrapped families in warmth. Children, small and vulnerable, were bundled in multiple layers, their arms and legs insulated with stitched scraps and strips of cloth. Function dictated form, fashion was secondary, yet aesthetics occasionally emerged from necessity. Hats and hoods were indispensable. Ears, the most frost-prone appendages, were covered with leather, felt, or wool. Mittens, leggings, and thick socks protected extremities.
Even simple hand-knit gloves or patched leather mitts were critical for outdoor labor. Survival required attention to every inch of exposed skin. Gender influenced clothing style and adaptation. Men's garments favored mobility and durability for outdoor work. Long tunics over layered shirts, leather belts to secure tools, sturdy boots for frozen terrain. Women prioritized warmth and domestic practicality. Layered skirts, woolen shawls, and aprons doubling as insulation. Children mirrored adult strategies, learning layering, fastening, and adjustment from a young age. Clothing education became part of early survival training. Maintenance was continuous. Snow, mud, and soot stained garments. Patches and stitches were applied daily to prevent wear from turning into vulnerability. Clothes were aired near hearths, dried slowly, and brushed to remove dust and insects. Improvised repair, strips of old cloth, wool scraps, or leather, ensured continuity of warmth when resources were scarce. Each patch told a story of resilience and resourcefulness. Practical design shaped the culture of dress. Capes doubled as blankets, tunics as bedding layers at night, hoods as windbreakers. Even modest adornments, a colored thread, a decorative stitch, became a subtle assertion of identity within the limitations of poverty. Clothing was a blend of survival, identity, and ingenuity. Resourcefulness extended to every piece of material. Worn garments were repurposed, scraps stuffed into mittens, rags wrapped around children's legs, extra layers sewn into cloaks for insulation. Families creatively maximized available fabric, demonstrating both foresight and ingenuity. Clothing became a living testament to adaptation and practicality. Psychologically, clothing provided reassurance. The act of layering, patching, or adjusting garments created a sense of control over the environment. Even in extreme cold, the tactile comfort of wool, the protective weight of layered fabrics, and the visual cues of warm, intact garments reinforced confidence, hope, and family cohesion. Children were taught clothing care early. Learning to layer properly, repair a sleeve, or secure a cloak were survival lessons disguised as daily routines. These skills prepared them for independent life and instilled discipline, responsibility, and ingenuity. Layering became second nature, a subtle, constant negotiation between warmth, mobility, and resource conservation. At nightfall, families huddled in layered garments, blankets, and straw-filled bedding. Clothing carefully maintained and strategically applied provided insulation, comfort, and emotional security. Every piece was purposeful, reinforcing survival, identity, and community norms. Clothing was not merely protection, it was survival art. Each stitch, each layer, each patch, and each adaptation reflected human ingenuity, resilience, and the delicate balance between resource scarcity and necessity. Winter fashion, humble yet essential, was a narrative of adaptation, family care, and cultural continuity.
Family, love, and intimacy in winter. Winter nights were long, silent, and unforgiving. Darkness stretched across cottages, settling like a heavy blanket over the frost-bitten village. In such nights, the bonds of family became both shield and sustenance. For medieval peasants, love and intimacy were not luxuries, they were survival strategies. The family slept together, tightly huddled on straw-filled beds, layered with blankets and cloaks. Every body heat counted. Parents wrapped themselves around children, older siblings pressed together. Livestock often slept near the hearth to contribute warmth. Privacy was non-existent, modesty secondary to survival. The cold outside was merciless. Togetherness inside was life-saving. Huddling was a delicate art. Parents positioned children closest to their warmth, adjusting layers, tucking blankets, and ensuring no extremities were exposed. The physical closeness generated more than heat. It provided reassurance, emotional security, and a shared resilience against the harsh winter nights. Families learned instinctively how to position themselves for maximum warmth. Love in this context was practical and profound. Couples shared blankets, whispered reassurances, and comforted each other after exhausting days of labor. The simple act of holding hands, a gentle touch, or a shared smile became both intimacy and psychological reinforcement. In winter, love and survival intertwined. Emotional bonds fortified the body as much as physical warmth. Children were central to the winter cocoon. Feeding, monitoring for fever, tucking into layered clothing, every action was part of survival. Parents sang songs, told stories, and whispered legends to distract from the cold and fear. These rituals reinforced trust, family cohesion, and resilience. Emotional bonds were survival tools as much as blankets or layered garments. Even the humblest cottages became centers of intimacy. Straw beds, though scratchy, were shared. Blankets, though thin, were layered. Warmth was communal. Parents adjusted layers repeatedly during the night, responding to restless children, shifting positions or drafts from tiny holes in the walls. The nightly routine was laborious, meticulous, and life-sustaining. Romantic intimacy continued subtly amid necessity. Adults relied on nighttime warmth and proximity to strengthen emotional bonds. Whispered conversations, hand-holding under blankets, and shared responsibilities fostered closeness. Sexuality existed, but adapted to the environment. Privacy was minimal, comfort and warmth were paramount, and love became deeply intertwined with survival strategies. Pregnancy and childbirth added complexity. Expectant mothers were protected, their layers adjusted meticulously, while midwives or family members monitored their health. The cold was a constant threat. Warmth, blankets, and shared proximity mitigated risk. Childbirth itself often took place in these winter cocoons, with family members providing warmth, emotional support, and assistance. Survival demanded intimacy and care at every level. Feeding routines intertwined with sleep. Infants and young children were nursed in rotation, keeping them warm while mothers maintained energy. Older children assisted quietly, fetching water, adjusting straw bedding, or rearranging cloaks. The household functioned as a living organism, every action coordinated for warmth, comfort, and survival. Storytelling and oral tradition reinforced emotional survival. Tales of ancestors, saints, and local heroes were shared in hushed tones, the flicker of candlelight reflecting off frost-lined walls. These stories distracted from discomfort, instilled cultural memory, and reinforced moral lessons. Intimacy and education merged seamlessly. Children learned through touch, observation, and narrative. Even small gestures mattered. A gentle brush of hair from a child's face, a warm hand placed over a chilled arm, or the shared laughter over a minor mishap. All were intimate acts sustaining morale. Emotional warmth was as crucial as firewood, layering, or food. Psychologically, collective sleeping offered stability. Cold, hunger, and darkness threatened despair, yet family intimacy created a shield. Trust, routine, and affection mitigated fear. The human touch reassured each member. Warmth of bodies, whispered words, shared breath, and rhythmic heartbeat all reinforced life itself. Through the long night, family survival strategies included layering, huddling, and continuous adjustment. Adults monitored children, shared blankets, and adjusted clothing. Each small act, though mundane, was critical.
Survival depended on these cumulative gestures, on love translated into action, on intimacy as a tool of endurance. Winter love and intimacy were not just emotional, they were physical, practical, and essential. Heat, comfort, reassurance, and trust blended seamlessly. Families survived frost, snow, and hunger because they were together, because love was actionable, because every touch was both nurturing and protective. By dawn, cottages glowed faintly with residual warmth, bodies still intertwined, the night endured, hearts steady and spirits fortified. Family, love, and intimacy in winter were life itself, a mosaic of warmth, care, courage, and human connection that transcended scarcity and cold. In medieval winter, intimacy was survival, love was strategy, and togetherness was armor. The frost outside could bite, the wind could howl, yet inside the cocoon of layered blankets, straw beds, and intertwined bodies, hope persisted. Families endured because they were bound by more than necessity. They were bound by care, affection, and the timeless human instinct to protect and nurture those closest.
Surviving the cold. Lessons, ingenuity, and legacy. Winter was more than a season. It was a teacher, stern, unyielding, and eternal. For medieval peasants, surviving the frost-laden months was a masterclass in endurance, creativity, and human resilience. Each family, each cottage, each small hearth became a laboratory for innovation, a sanctuary for survival, and a testament to the power of community, love, and ingenuity. Every element of survival was interconnected. Clothing, layered and patched, insulated not just the body, but the spirit. Food, preserved with care, sustained life and morale. Hygiene, meticulous despite freezing temperatures, protected against disease and preserved dignity. Labor, relentless and adaptive, ensured warmth, shelter, and food for the household. Intimacy and family bonds, shared through huddled nights and collective care, fortified emotional resilience. Together, these strategies formed a holistic survival system. Ingenuity defined medieval winter life. Peasants repurposed everything. Worn garments became mittens. Scraps insulated beds. Leftover food extended meals, and herbs substituted for medicine. Every challenge invited creativity. Frozen wells, icy paths, and snow-laden roofs demanded adaptive solutions, breaking ice for water, building windbreaks, or creating insulation from straw, dung, or moss. Ingenuity was survival, and necessity was its mentor. Community played a pivotal role. Villagers shared knowledge, offered labor, exchanged firewood, and taught younger generations the subtleties of winter survival. Oral tradition carried the wisdom of centuries. Which herb cured coughs, which storage technique preserved vegetables, how to layer clothing efficiently, and how to manage communal warmth. Knowledge flowed like a lifeline, weaving families and communities together in the face of adversity. Children absorbed these lessons early. Observation, imitation, and participation became education. They learned the rhythm of winter, when to tend animals, how to manage frozen water, how to repair clothing, and how to care for siblings. Skills were internalized, becoming second nature. These lessons were more than survival tactics. They were rites of passage, forging resilience, responsibility, and ingenuity. Emotional survival was equally vital. Harsh winters could crush spirits, yet hope persisted. Families relied on small victories, a repaired cloak, a preserved root vegetable, a warm straw bed, a shared story by the hearth. Each act of care reinforced morale. Psychological resilience was cultivated through ritual, observation, and shared experience, making endurance both tangible and meaningful. The lessons of winter were holistic. Adaptation blended practicality with empathy. Parents balanced rationing with nourishment, warmth with mobility, labor with rest. Intimacy, love, and care were practical strategies as much as emotional needs. Survival was a continuum. Attention to detail, foresight, and community bonds ensured not only physical sustenance, but emotional and psychological endurance. Even the harshest nights bore insight. Darkness amplified the value of warmth, the importance of shared labor, and the necessity of vigilance. Snowstorms, ice, and frost became teachers. Measure your efforts, conserve your resources, and always anticipate tomorrow. Medieval peasants learned to read the subtle signs of nature, the thickness of ice, the density of snow, or the patterns of wind. Each observation informed survival strategies, sometimes life-saving, sometimes sustaining dignity. Hearths glowed with more than fire. They radiated ingenuity, warmth, and hope. Families gathered, sharing meals, stories, and laughter despite scarcity. Children learned through touch, observation, and participation. Adults reinforced survival routines, patched clothing, prepared food, and administered care. These nightly rituals were as critical as chopping firewood or mending garments. They preserved spirit, morale, and the continuity of knowledge. By the end of winter, the lessons were profound. Each surviving household carried forward the wisdom of frost and famine. Ingenuity, resilience, communal bonds, emotional care, and adaptability became cultural inheritance. These survival strategies did more than protect bodies. They strengthened families, communities, and the very fabric of human endurance. And as snow melted and spring returned, the lessons persisted. Families emerged stronger, children wiser, and communities more cohesive. Winter had tested them, shaped them, and inspired them. Each cottage, every straw bed, and every patchwork cloak became a symbol of resilience, a tangible manifestation of human ingenuity, care, and determination. And in the quiet evenings, when the hearth fire flickered and the village settled, one could sense the triumph of the human spirit. The cold had been brutal, yet life endured. Stories were shared, skills were taught, and bonds were reinforced. Each act of warmth, care, and ingenuity reverberated through generations. Medieval peasants endured frost, hunger, and hardship not because life was easy, but because survival demanded excellence in observation, adaptability, emotional intelligence, and community cohesion. Theirs was a story of courage, creativity, and heart. And so the winter passed, as all winters do, but the lessons endured. Ingenuity transforms scarcity into survival. Community and family are shields against adversity. Love, care, and intimacy are essential sustenance. Observation, adaptation, and foresight are timeless tools. The story of medieval winters is more than survival. It is a celebration of human resilience. It reminds us that even in the coldest, darkest nights, warmth can be found in love, resourcefulness, and community. And in every flake of frost, every huddled family, and every straw-filled bed, one can see the enduring triumph of the human spirit.
The last ember, a farewell to the frozen nights. The frost was thinning. Icicles that once hung like fangs from rooftops began to melt, dripping softly, like time itself easing its grip. The world, silent and pale for months, stirred again. Beneath the crust of frozen earth, life waited, patient, quiet, and ready. Inside the small huts, the air felt different, still cold, but less cruel. The hearths burned lower now, their flames tired but faithful. Each ember was a memory of nights survived, of hunger endured, of laughter whispered under thick blankets and shared dreams. For the medieval peasant, the final weeks of winter were a mix of exhaustion and quiet triumph. Their hands were cracked, their backs sore, but their hearts carried something priceless. The knowledge that they had once again beaten the cold. Every day that dawned meant fewer nights to fear, fewer fires to feed, fewer tears to hide. Children played outside again, their boots sinking in the half-melted snow. They chased each other around the muddy fields, giggling, their breath forming little clouds that rose and vanished in the sunlight. Mothers watched from doorways, smiling faintly, not because the cold was gone, but because they knew they'd made it through. Food was still scarce, but the worst had passed. The last of the stored roots and salted meats were rationed carefully as people began preparing their fields for spring. It was almost ceremonial, the clearing of frost, the sweeping of doorways, the sharpening of tools. Each act carried hope. Fathers repaired plows, mothers mended clothes, and the smell of smoke began to fade from the air. The birds returned first, their songs echoing like promises. Then came the thawing streams, rushing down from the hills, carrying away the memory of winter's silence. But even as the snow retreated, winter's lessons lingered. The peasants had learned, once again, that survival wasn't just about food or fire. It was about togetherness, about listening to each other breathe in the dark, about giving your last piece of bread to a child, about laughter in the middle of hunger. That was the real victory. Not simply living, but refusing to lose their humanity in the cold. In the evenings, families still gathered around the hearth. The fire was smaller now, but warmer somehow. They talked about the storms that had nearly broken the roof, about the neighbors who'd helped patch it, about the one lost goat that miraculously found its way home. They laughed softly, each story a reminder that the human spirit, even when bent, never breaks. Grandmothers told tales of winters older than anyone could remember, of blizzards that swallowed villages, and of the brave who refused to give up. Each story ended the same way, with firelight, a small act of kindness, and someone singing softly into the dark. The younger ones listened wide-eyed, as if these tales were sacred scripture. In a way, they were, for these stories carried not only memory, but guidance, lessons about endurance, about love, about how to live when the world turns against you. The final night of winter was always a quiet celebration. No grand feast, no lavish ritual, just a moment when everyone paused, listened to the wind, and realized it no longer howled. The silence outside was peaceful now, no longer cruel.
Someone might whisper a prayer, someone else might hum a song, and together they'd sit, watching the embers fade into ash. Those last glowing coals symbolized something profound, the will to endure, to light the dark, to outlast despair. As the fire dimmed, they didn't mourn the cold, they honored it, because winter had been both enemy and teacher, pain and wisdom. It had stripped away comfort, but revealed strength. It had taken much, but left behind resilience, the kind that burns quietly like an ember that refuses to die. The next morning, the sun returned, pale and shy at first, then golden and full. It spilled across the fields, warming the earth, kissing the rooftops, glinting off the puddles where snow had once ruled. Birds sang louder, and the sound felt like forgiveness. People stepped outside, squinting into the light. The air smelled different, damp, alive, hopeful. The air carried the scent of earth instead of smoke, of promise instead of fear. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Their silence was filled with gratitude. Children picked the first green shoots pushing through the soil. Women hung blankets outside to dry. Men turned the soil with hands still scarred from frostbite. The village, once gray and silent, came alive again. Life had returned, fragile yet unbreakable. And as the peasants looked around, they knew something unspoken. Every hardship, every freezing night, every hunger pang had led to this, the warmth, the light, the rebirth. They had survived not just winter, but the test of endurance, of compassion, of spirit. Because in the end, that was the legacy of medieval winter, the triumph of humanity over nature's cruelty. The reminder that even in the darkest months, people could find warmth in one another, that love could be a blanket, that laughter could be a fire. And as the last ember turned to ash, the peasants didn't fear the next winter. They respected it. They understood it. For they knew the cold would always return, but so would they, stronger, wiser, together. The wind carried their laughter across the fields, mingling with the first song of spring, and for a moment the whole world seemed to whisper back, "You endured."